fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
The 9 main fears. Which one are you? Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again, Salt Strong Unchurched. This could be one of the most powerful episodes I've ever done. I know this because I've been going through this myself with my coach, Chris McAllister, and got to define my number one fear. I realize mine's different than maybe yours and even some people who I love and, in my life, like my wife and brother and coworkers, et cetera. And I've been able to understand now their fears and what kind of drives them. And I talked about this briefly on the last couple of podcasts, this whole proving and hiding. And so many times, even though we might not know it, meaning it's unconscious, we make decisions out of an insecure identity that all boils down to our fear. And I'm going to give you some examples and go over each one of these major fears. And once you understand what your fears are, it makes it so much easier to all of a sudden catch yourself when you are proving or hiding, right? Most of the time, I'll just give you an example. Mine is the fear of bad performance. And what that means is I have this innate fear, it's ingrained in me and I can't get rid of it. That I'm going to be very clear. This is not about changing you. It's making you aware of when you are proving and hiding to basically help you feel better about yourself and your fears, to be able to stop it and kind of flip the sucker on its head and make better decisions, not based out of fear. That's how you get in a flow state, right? Fear blocks flow. You cannot have both at the same time. It's one or the other. And so for me, I have this performance or a fear of bad performance. Let me be a little bit more specific. And that means if I'm not performing well, like if I'm not excelling and getting stuff done, right, and being at the top and having people see me at the top and doing great things, then I feel like my worth is low. And I'll just give you an example, like with fishing, right? Because I have a fishing company. There's times where I'm crushing it. I want everyone to know about it. And then maybe the next trip, I'm getting skunked and everyone around me is catching fish. And me proving would be, when everyone's afterwards, let's just say it's a bunch of guys and we're all talking stories and I had the worst day ever. And instead of just, saying, you know what, this doesn't define who I am, that's what I should be doing, right? That, hey, this bad day, yes, it was a bad day on the water, doesn't define who I am. And instead, I let this whole fear take hold of me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to think less of me because I had a horrible day. And so I start proving like, hey guys, remember like 2 weeks ago when I was the best out of all you guys? Or you remember that one time, like I was catching fish after fish. And that's annoying, right? We've seen people do that have that same fear I do, that just want to keep talking about things in the past when they had a bad day or if they screwed up, right? So many times I screw up, I make mistakes, and I want to remind people, oh yeah, but you remember that time, when I did this? Or yeah, but I also did this, and that's all just proving over and over and over again, and it's impossible to really be secure in your identity when you're having to prove like that, or the opposite is hiding and kind of moving away, and I don't know, it's just really, really fascinating. It's completely changed my whole mindset. It's still not perfect, right? I've still found sometimes that I just want to go into that proving or hiding mode, but I'm able to kind of take a step back, like really just take some slow breaths, right? And just kind of calm down and say, all right, does this really define who I am, right? Does a bad day of fishing or even a bad day at work, right? Or maybe I screwed up, or maybe a lot of people saw me screw up, right? Or I did something dumb. Does it really define who I am? Does God love me any more or less because of this, right? And if you start asking those questions, you start realizing, man, it is kind of silly, right? God doesn't love me any less because I didn't catch fish that day, or I didn't perform well on this test, or maybe I look like a fool for a short amount of time. Does God love me any more or less? Am I any less worthy of a person? And 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. And even the times when maybe it makes you feel a little less worthy, those are usually areas and times of your life when you are growing because you're learning from them. So let's get into these 9 different fears. And just to kind of recap, this whole fear narrative is so critical because you cannot be in a flow, right? Fear blocks flow. And everything really hinges on understanding this, because you can't reframe everything in your life, right? You cannot be completely fulfilled and just feel like you're in a state of flow until you gain awareness of the fear narrative that is driving your actions, right? Because if you have one of these fears, and you do, it's guaranteed you have one of these 9, it is driving many of your actions, whether you know it or not. Once you start really understanding it, you realize, wow, I am letting so many of my decisions and my actions be driven by this fear. It is really, it's crazy, right? And this fear, this narrative, it's what keeps you from being fully engaged in your life. It's absolutely crazy. And so once you understand this, it slowly starts unblocking all of these things in your life that have been really holding you back from being the best version of yourself. That's what this whole thing is about. And usually it is found in the form of proving or hiding in almost every case. So let's go through all 9 of them. These are in no specific order. Fear of not being needed. And this kind of has the mindset of, hey, if I'm not needed, then I'm not loved. That is the underlying mindset of someone who has this fear of not being needed. And you've probably seen this in people who who are just always just doing stuff and making sure everyone knows, oh my gosh, yeah, I did this and I did this. And deep down, it's because it's the insecure identity is, well, gosh, if they don't know that I did this and accomplished all this and did all this cool stuff for them. And this could be, a lot of times in relationships, the spouse, like, well, hey, I did all this stuff. It's this fear of not being needed, that if I'm not needed, then all of a sudden I'm not worthy and I'm not loved. And that's a pretty popular one. The fear of not being cared for. And this one is, if I don't take care of myself, no one else will. It always feels like everything is on your shoulders, and there's no place that you can just let go and rest and know that you're taken care of. It just always this dominating feel or a sense of not being cared for. Number 3, the fear of not belonging. I don't belong anywhere. And if this is your fear, you're constantly looking for a place to call home. You hope that finally this will be the relationship where you can fully be known for who you are, or finally some job or a role that will be your tribe. You're just constantly looking for that tribe because you feel like you just this fear of never really belonging into a group. A fear of inadequacy. This is another really popular one. It's just, I don't have what it takes. This one, it happens a lot. And when the first time I went through these, I thought this was me. It wasn't. And this is more like this feeling of like, man, if I can't do it flawlessly, and if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not good enough. And so what you tend to do with fear of inadequacy is you tend to like hyper specialize in one area where you can be the absolute best, but because of that, you really fail to do a lot of other things. Like, meaning, if your fear of inadequacy is your number one kind of leading fear, then you will walk away or shun away or stop doing things where you can't be great or be the best. So it's fear of inadequacy. Fear of poor performance. That is me. This was, hey, I can't perform well enough to feel worthy. And if this is your fear, you're constantly waking up in the morning and the scoreboard is negative or a 0, right? It's no matter what you do, no matter how much you achieve or accomplish, you never feel like you could move the needle enough to wake up just feeling awesome and worthy. And here's like an example, right? I've had days where I've gotten so much done, like more than probably 99% of the country, right? I mean, just crushed it in terms of really looking at my day. But there was one little thing that I wanted to get done that I didn't. And it sits there and bugs me and nags me. and I feel inadequate. I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not worthy. I didn't get all this stuff done yet. If you really just took a breather and looked and say, oh my gosh, look how much I accomplished. But it's crazy, right? When we have that fear, it blocks us. It's like we can't see this sometimes. That's why it's so powerful to really look internally, figure out what your fear is. The fear of being a bad person. I'm a bad person, and people. This is people, you've seen them. They just beat themselves up over this time and time again, and they need someone to basically just give them reassurance. And so it's almost like, hey, I'm a bad person, therefore bad things are going to happen to me, or I'm going to have to just settle for being treated this way. I deserve it. This is a lot of people who end up, in abusive relationships, and very, very sad. Fear of a bad outcome. This is essentially the fear of making mistakes, right? Well, so guess what they do? They do nothing, right? So instead of maybe even taking a chance on something, they get so concerned. Oh my gosh, it might have a bad outcome, right? Or gosh, what if I screw up? So they just end up kind of doing nothing, and they procrastinate. And it's like, oh, if I mess up, the worst will happen. And the earth is just going to fall from under my feet at any moment. And it feels like there's nothing really secure. So in turn, it's always just quick decisions back and forth, very indecisive. So that's the fear of a bad outcome. Fear of vulnerability. And this is more, hey, if I'm vulnerable, then I'll be hurt. So guess what they do? They hide everything and keep everything in. I've seen relationships with some of my friends in the past that unfortunately didn't work out, and I knew the person had this feel of vulnerability where it just never would talk about anything, right? Just because if I get vulnerable and tell them I'm going to look weak, and they're just going to leave me, and now they hold everything in, and there's just no communication. It's a really, really tough one. And then finally, the fear of being replaceable. And that's this whole feeling of, oh, I'm nothing special. And, if you believe you're nothing special, then you're constantly on the search to figure out something that's unique about you. And then fear begins to really set in. And then all of a sudden you feel replaceable, and you feel like you're just one of 7 billion people, and you're just a number. And, that's really, really tough. And this is that's one I personally can't really relate with, but just reading through it, I mean, just the pain of that one, of just feeling like, oh gosh, I'm just replaceable, and so you're constantly looking, just try to get some reassurance from people to say, oh gosh, yeah, you are loved. And with every one of these, it all goes back. Whoop, my alarm was going off there. With every single one of these, it all goes back to this improving or hiding. And so start looking at your life, and, depending on which one of those resonated with you the most. And the book is called Figure That Shift Out by Chris McAllister, where he goes into each one of these a whole lot more in depth. But just start really watching yourself and watching others around you, and trying to pick out times when you are proving or hiding. For a lot of people like myself, who are CEOs and founders of companies and have this kind of performance-driven one that seems to be a pretty popular one, most of the time we're not hiding so much, we're proving. A lot of the other ones, it's the opposite. It's kind of just hiding from things, and meaning kind of burying it, like the vulnerability, not talking about it. People like myself, I don't have a problem talking about it and get stuff out on the table. It kills me to hold stuff in. I want to get stuff out and talk about it and get on the table. I don't like to just sleep on it. Whereas other people like to hide this stuff and just kind of hope it goes away. I'm the opposite, right? Like, I feel like if I'm not talking about it and getting stuff done and selling stuff, then I'm not worthy. And so it all comes back to this feeling of, not being worthy and loved. But the beauty of this is once you can identify the fear and start calling yourself out on it, right? You're not trying to eliminate it or change yourself. The fear is a good thing, right? Fear keeps us alive. These fears are there to make us unique and special, and can definitely make us a better version of ourselves. But if you let it run your lives and you start making bad decisions because of this fear, that's where you get into trouble. And that's where you start proving and hiding and really living your life out of fear. instead of living your life out of an abundant mindset and knowing that, hey, yeah, I do have this fear. It's natural. We all have some sort of fear like this. How can I use this to the best of my ability? So I hope this was helpful. I am going to have Chris on. He does a whole lot better job than me, but I wanted to at least start kind of planting some of these seeds, if you will, and at least giving you kind of a 30,000 foot view of these different fears and how we're all wired. So that at least when you hear Chris talk about this, we'll go really in depth and you'll have a much better understanding about some of these things already. So hope this was helpful. Hit me up if this was resonated with you or if you understand what your fear was. I'll read them out real quick one more time. So fear of not being needed, fear of not being cared for, fear of not belonging, fear of inadequacy, fear of poor performance, fear of being a bad person, fear of a bad outcome, fear of vulnerability, or fear of being replaceable. Guys, appreciate you, love you. And my email, joe@saltstrong.com. If you have any thoughts, questions, I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I will talk to you in the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.